The house had 43 rooms. Robert Caldwell had counted them once years ago when he first bought the property and stood in the empty foyer trying to convince himself that the size of a thing could be a substitute for the warmth of it. 43 rooms, 12 fireplaces, 4 staircases, a garden that ran all the way to the tree line where Connecticut winters turn the grass silver and the branches bare and skeletal against a pale gray sky. He had filled the rooms with the right furniture, hired the right staff, enrolled Lily in the right school, the kind with a stone entrance and a Latin motto carved above the door, and a waiting list that parents began planning for before their children were old enough to read. He had done everything correctly in the precise and measured way. He had always done things the way that had made him very successful, and he was beginning to understand, not entirely present. And still some mornings, he would stand at the window of his study with his coffee going cold in his hand and feel that the house was holding its breath around him, that all 43 rooms were waiting for something he had not yet figured out how to provide. Eleanor would have known what was missing, but Eleanor was gone, and knowing what was missing was now his job alone. He was 58 years old, and he was still learning what the job required. The 5 women arrived at 9 o'clock on a Thursday morning in January. Robert had arranged it through an agency in New York, the best agency naturally, with a waiting list and a reputation for placing candidates in households that required discretion, structure, and what the agency director called a high standard of professional warmth. Their folders had been sent ahead by courier earlier in the week. Robert had read each one the evening before, seated at his desk with a glass of water and a pen, annotating in the margins with the focused attention he gave to acquisition reports and contract terms. He was good at reading people on paper. He knew which numbers to look for, which gaps in a resume meant something, and which gaps were simply the ordinary interruptions of a life lived. All 5 candidates were strong. 2 of them were exceptional. The women arrived together in a hired car, which suggested the agency had coordinated their travel, which suggested the agency took this placement seriously, which was exactly what Robert had paid for. They were shown into the east sitting room by Mrs. Graham, the house manager, a composed woman in her late 60s who had worked in large households for over 30 years and had learned how to read a room before she entered it. The 5 candidates sat in a careful line, back straight, folders on their laps, expressions practiced into something calibrated precisely between confidence and approachability. They were all well-dressed in the subdued professional way of women who understood that their appearance was part of the interview before the interview began. Robert reviewed the setup from the doorway before entering. Clean, professional, correct. Then Lily walked in. She was 7 years old and small for her age, with dark eyes that moved across a room like a hand running along a shelf and touching everything lightly and carefully before deciding what mattered. She wore her school uniform, still navy skirt, white blouse with a small collar, because it was a school day, and she had been brought home early for this. Her hair was in 2 braids, very neat, and even tied at the ends with small blue ribbons. Robert watched his daughter cross the room. She did not look nervous. She looked the way she always looked when she had already decided something and was simply waiting for the world to catch up. He had noticed this quality in her from the beginning, from the first week after the adoption, when she had been 4 years old and very quiet and had sat in the corner of the library for 3 days straight, watching the household before she decided it was safe. She had not been hiding. She had been measuring. "Lily," he said from his position near the fireplace, "these women are here to meet you. Take your time. Ask questions if you would like." Lily looked at the 5 women. They smiled at her warm, practiced, calibrated smiles that had been perfected through years of meeting children who needed to be won over gently. One of them shifted slightly in her seat to seem less tall, less imposing. Another tilted her head to one side in the way that people do when they want to communicate that they are safe and approachable and very interested in what you have to say. "Hello, Lily," the woman nearest to her said. Her name was Christine, according to the folder, and she had worked with children for 12 years, including 2 years with a family in London and 4 years with a family outside Boston. "My name is Christine. I have worked with children your age for a very long time. I think we are going to get along very well." Lily looked at her. She did not smile back. "How do you know?" she asked. Christine blinked at once. "Well, I have worked with many children over the years, and I have a sense for these things." "But you do not know me," Lily said. Not unkindly, the way a child says something that is simply true and has not yet learned that truth sometimes requires softening. Another woman stepped in smoothly, the way professionals do when they sense a conversation drifting in an unexpected direction. "That is exactly right," she said warmly. "We would very much like to get to know you. That is part of why we are all here today. Perhaps you could tell us a little about yourself. What do you enjoy?" Lily considered the question with the seriousness she gave to most questions. "I like reading," she said, "and drawing. I like it when it snows enough to cover all the branches because then the trees look like they are wearing white gloves." She paused. "I do not like loud noises or when people pretend to like things they do not actually like." Another pause. "I can usually tell when people are pretending." The room went slightly still. Robert stood near the fireplace with his arms loosely crossed, watching. A third woman, the one who had worked for the senator's family for 11 years and spoke 3 languages, smiled warmly and leaned forward just slightly. "Lily, if you could describe your perfect day, what would it look like? If you could choose anything at all, what would you choose to do?" Lily thought about the question. She looked at the ceiling for a moment, which was something she did when she was thinking seriously. Then she turned and walked across the room, not toward the women, away from them. She walked to the doorway that connected the east sitting room to the main hall, where Margaret Holt was standing with a folded cloth in her hands, as she often was present, quiet always just at the edge of the family space without ever entering it unless invited. It was a particular skill of good household staff, this ability to be available and invisible at the same time, and Maggie had mastered it over decades of work in large homes. Maggie was 52 years old. She had silver threaded through dark hair that she kept pulled back neatly. Her hands were the hands of someone who had worked with them for a long time, capable and careful, never entirely still. She had come to work in the Caldwell house 8 years ago in the spring, 2 years before Eleanor's accident and 4 years before Lily's adoption. She had stayed through both, through the long quiet after Eleanor died, when the house became something more like a museum than a home, each room preserved and untouched and airless, and through the arrival of a small 4-year-old girl who had sat in the library corner for 3 days watching before she decided it was safe. Lily walked to Maggie and took her hand. "I choose her," Lily said. The 5 women looked at each other. The looks were brief and professional, but Robert caught them. Robert caught everything in rooms like this one. It was a skill that had served him well in 40 years of business. Maggie looked at the floor. "Lily," Robert's voice was even, careful, the voice of a man who was used to managing situations that were moving in unexpected directions. "Miss Holt is not one of the candidates." "I know," Lily said, "but she is my choice." One of the women recovered quickly, which was a mark of her professionalism. She stood not fully, just enough to shift the energy of the room slightly, and spoke in a tone that was gentle and practiced and carried within it the particular authority of someone who had navigated this kind of moment before. "Lily, I can see that you are very close to Miss Holt, and that is a lovely thing. But a nanny is a different kind of role. We are trained specifically to support children with their education, their activities, their social and emotional development. That is what your father is trying to provide for you." "She already does all of that," Lily said. "She is trained for housekeeping," another woman said carefully. "She is trained for me," Lily replied. Robert uncrossed his arms. "Lily, that is enough. Miss Holt has her own responsibilities in this house. She cannot simply take on a different position because you have decided she should." "Why not?" Lily asked. "Because that is not how things work." Lily looked at him steadily. She had her mother's eyes. Robert had thought this many times, Eleanor's particular directness. Eleanor's quality of making you feel that whatever you had just said was being quietly examined for accuracy and found wanting. "She stayed with me all night when I had a fever last March," Lily said. "She slept in the chair by my bed. Nobody told her to stay. Nobody was paying her extra to do that." The room was very quiet. "She braids my hair every morning so I feel ready for school," Lily continued. Her voice was calm and clear, the voice of someone presenting evidence rather than making an argument. "She notices when I have not eaten enough at dinner. She knows I am scared of the wind when it gets loud at night, so she taught me to count the seconds between the gusts so I would stop being afraid." She looked at the 5 women in their careful line, and at 7 years old there was nothing combative in her face, nothing petulant or demanding. Just a child stating facts she believed should matter to anyone paying attention. "I do not know any of you," she said. "You do not know me, but she knows me." One of the candidates kept her voice very measured. "Ms. Holt may care for you very much, but caring and professional child rearing are different things. There is structure, curriculum, developmental planning. These things require specific training and experience. She taught me how to tell the difference between a person who is genuinely kind and a person who is performing kindness," Lily said. "Is that not a curriculum?" No one answered. Robert felt something tighten in his chest, not anger, something more complicated than anger, something that felt like standing in a room where a painting had been slightly crooked for years and someone had just walked in and pointed at it. He made his voice final. "Lily, go upstairs. Tomorrow morning you will come downstairs and you will make a proper choice from among these 5 candidates. That is my decision and it is not going to change today." Lily looked at him for a moment. She did not argue. She did not cry. She simply looked at Maggie once more, then turned and walked toward the hallway. But at the base of the staircase, she stopped. She did not turn around. She said it to the air in front of her quietly and clearly. "I will choose her again tomorrow. I just wanted you to know now so you would not be surprised." Then she went upstairs. The 5 women gathered themselves with professional composure. One of them said something measured about understanding how difficult these transitions could be for children. Robert thanked them and asked Mrs. Graham to show them to the drawing room while he made some calls. When the door closed behind them, he stood alone in the east sitting room for a long moment. He walked to the window and looked out at the winter garden. The lawn was white. The trees were bare. Everything was clean and cold and correct. He went upstairs. He did not usually handle bedtime. That had always been someone else's function in the household. First Eleanor's, then a rotating system of staff coverage that had never quite settled into anything consistent after Eleanor was gone. But tonight he went to Lily's room and knocked lightly on the open door. She was already in bed with her stuffed rabbit, a worn gray thing she had carried with her from the group home and would not part with despite the fact that one of its ears was significantly more loved than the other. She looked up when he came in, unsurprised by his presence, which told him she had been expecting him. He sat in the chair near the window, the upholstered chair with the blue cushion. He noticed as he sat down that it was positioned exactly at the right angle to see both the door and the bed. He had the uncomfortable realization that it had probably been positioned that way deliberately by someone who spent time in it regularly. "You understand why I cannot simply change a staff member's position because you want me to," he said. "I understand that you think the way things are arranged is the way they have to be arranged," Lily said. Robert looked at his daughter. He had been a CEO for 22 years. He had sat across tables from people who were trying to dismantle his positions, and he had almost always known how to respond. He did not know how to respond to that. "I'm trying to give you the best possible care," he said. "She is the best possible care," Lily replied. "Not because she has a certificate, because she is there." He stayed for another few minutes without resolving anything. He said goodnight. He turned off the light in the hallway so it would not keep her awake. Then he went to his study and did something he had not done in a long time. He sat without working. He sat in the leather chair behind his desk and looked at nothing and let the silence of the house settle around him. The house was very good at silence. It had had a lot of practice. After a while, he opened the bottom drawer of his desk. Not for any document. He reached past the files to the back of the drawer and took out a small, cloth-bound book and with a worn cover and a ribbon marker. Eleanor's journal. He kept it there because he could not decide what else to do with it, and he could not bring himself to put it with the archived things in the spare room down the hall where Absence lived. He opened it sometimes, not often, when the house felt too large and too quiet, and he needed to hear her voice in some form. Tonight he opened it to the middle to the entries from 3 years ago, the last good year, and he read slowly. The entry was dated March. His eyes found the relevant passage halfway down the page. "Lily is sick again. Low fever, nothing serious, but she will not settle. I could hear her moving around at 2 in the morning. By the time I got to her room, Maggie was already there. Had been there for over an hour, apparently. Lily was finally asleep in her arms. I stood in the doorway and watched them for a while. I thought about all the nights I was traveling or working late or simply too tired to be the person Lily needed at 2 in the morning. And I thought Maggie fills the spaces we leave. Not because we ask her to, because she cannot do otherwise. Some people are simply made that way. The world does not always know what to do with people like that. It tends to undervalue them because they do not advertise their worth. I hope Robert is brave enough when the time comes to let Lily keep the people who are made that way. I think it will require bravery. He is not always comfortable with things that do not fit neatly into categories. Robert read the entry twice. Then he sat very still for a long time. He thought about Lily standing in the east sitting room with her hand in Maggie's and her voice perfectly calm, stating her case without drama or tears, the way someone speaks when they are certain they are right and have accepted the possibility that it might not matter. He thought about what Eleanor had written. Some people are simply made that way. He closed the journal and put it back in the drawer. He did not sleep well that night. In the morning, he came downstairs earlier than usual to find Lily already at the kitchen table. She had eaten most of her oatmeal. She was drawing on a large piece of paper, 3 figures side by side, their hands connected. She did not look up when he came in, which meant she had heard him on the stairs and had decided not to acknowledge his arrival, which meant she was thinking carefully about the morning and what it required of her. He poured coffee and sat across from her. "The 5 candidates are returning this morning," he said. "I know," Lily said. "You understand that you need to make a final selection today." "I made my selection yesterday," Lily said. He sat with that for a moment. "Lily." "Daddy?" She looked up at him, and her voice was not angry, not pleading. It was the voice of someone who had thought about this very carefully and arrived at a position she intended to hold. "You told me she was not one of the choices, but she is the only one who showed up. Not this morning. Every morning for 3 years." She looked back at her drawing. "You can put me in that room again, but I am going to choose her." He looked at the drawing on the table. 3 figures, one tall in what appeared to be a dark jacket, one small with 2 braids, one in the middle with hands extended to both sides. "Who is in the middle?" he asked, though he suspected he already knew. "Maggie," Lily said simply. "She holds us together. That is what she does." Robert picked up his coffee. The steam rose in the cold kitchen air and disappeared. In the hallway beyond the kitchen door, Maggie was moving with her usual quiet efficiency, straightening, folding, attending to the 100 small tasks that kept a large house running. But Robert found himself watching her through the doorway, the way she moved through the space, the way she always seemed to know without looking where Lily was. Not because anyone had told her to track the child, because she could not do otherwise. He thought of Eleanor's words again. He thought of his own nanny, a woman named Margaret who had worked for his family from the time he was 3 until the morning his father decided he was too old for such arrangements and sent her away without a lengthy goodbye. He had been 10 years old. He had watched her walk out the front door with her single suitcase, and he had not been allowed to go down the stairs to say goodbye properly because his father did not believe in scenes, and goodbyes of that kind were scenes. He had stood at the top of the staircase and watched through the railing as she disappeared. He had never forgotten the particular quality of that disappearance. He set his coffee down. He was not going to send the 5 women away yet. There were rules, and he still believed in rules. There was a correct process, and he still believed in process. But something had shifted slightly in the architecture of his certainty, and he was honest enough to acknowledge it to himself, even if he was not yet ready to say it aloud. His phone rang. He looked at the screen. Victor. His brother had no reason to call before 9 in the morning, unless he had already heard something and had already decided what needed to be done about it. Robert answered. "I heard you are having some difficulty with the nanny situation," Victor said. His voice had the practiced warmth of a man who had spent decades making warmth function as a professional instrument. "I thought I would come by this morning, offer some perspective from someone who has been navigating family legal matters for a very long time." "I did not ask for your perspective," Robert said. "I know," Victor replied pleasantly. "That is often when perspective is most needed. I will be there at 11. Please do not make any permanent decisions before I arrive." The line went quiet. Robert looked out the kitchen window at the white winter garden. Something cold had entered the morning that had nothing to do with January. Victor Ashford arrived at 11 o'clock with the punctuality of a man who had always understood that controlling the time of his arrival was one of the first ways to establish a control of a meeting. He wore a charcoal overcoat over a dark suit. He carried a leather briefcase that he never seemed to actually require, but always brought with him the way some men carry visible symbols of authority because they are not entirely certain the authority lives inside them. He was 62 years old, 4 years older than Robert, and he had been a corporate and estate attorney for 35 years. He had the particular look of someone who had spent those decades being careful. Careful with words, careful with relationships, careful never to reveal the full extent of what he wanted until the moment when revealing it was an advantage. He had been their father's favorite, which was not something either of them had ever said directly, but which both of them had always known. Robert met him in the study. He did not offer coffee. "You did not need to come," Robert said. "You are about to make a significant decision regarding Lily's primary caregiver," Victor said, settling into the chair across the desk with the ease of a man who sat in offices and made himself comfortable in them as a professional practice. "Given Lily's legal adoption status and the specific language in Father's estate trust, I have legitimate standing to weigh in on decisions that could affect her welfare and, by extension, the family's legal position. My father's estate has nothing to do with how I staff my household." "Your father's estate has language in it that addresses guardianship fitness," Victor said. "And guardianship fitness is a broad term. If someone were to argue that you are making decisions about Lily's upbringing that demonstrate compromised judgment, those arguments would find their footing in that language." He paused, letting the words arrange themselves in the air between them. "I am not saying I would make those arguments. I am saying the language exists and others might use it if you give them reason to." Robert looked at his brother for a long moment. "You are threatening me." "I am protecting the family," Victor said. "I have always protected this family. Promoting a housekeeper to primary caregiver on the basis of a 7-year-old's preference does not reflect sound judgment, Robert. It reflects a man who has been destabilized by grief and is allowing a child's emotional responses to override adult decision-making." He opened the briefcase. "I have also done some preliminary background research on Miss Holt, which I think you will want to see before you proceed." He placed a folder on the desk between them. Robert did not pick it up immediately. He looked at it the way he looked at documents he already suspected contained something he would rather not have to act on. 15 years ago, Victor said, Margaret Holt was employed by a family in Westchester. The Lindqvist family, well-regarded substantial household private estate outside Tarrytown. During her employment there, a child was injured in the home. The family filed a civil complaint against her. He let that settle. The complaint was eventually withdrawn, but the record exists, and records like that have a way of becoming relevant when someone's fitness for childcare is being examined. Robert finally picked up the folder and opened it. The documents inside were thin but official, the kind of paperwork that has a specific weight to it, the weight of a moment in time that someone decided to formalize. He read them slowly and carefully. "A complaint was filed and then withdrawn," he said. "Filed complaints do not withdraw themselves," Victor said. "Something caused the Lindqvist to reconsider. We do not know what that was. But the existence of the complaint, the nature of the incident, these are things that speak to judgment and suitability." Robert closed the folder. He placed it on the desk to his right. He did not return it to Victor. "You had her investigated," he said. "I was thorough," Victor replied. "That is what I do." "It is also what you do when you have already decided on an outcome and you are looking for the evidence to support it," Robert said. Victor's expression did not change, but something behind it shifted very slightly. "I came here to help you," he said. "Choose one of the 5 qualified candidates. End this cleanly. There is no reason for this to become complicated." Robert said nothing. "I will let myself out," Victor said, standing, "but I will be back this afternoon, and I would encourage you to have made the correct decision by then." He left. Robert sat at his desk for a long time after the sound of Victor's car faded from the driveway. He was not the kind of man who sat without acting, but this required thought, and he gave it thought carefully the way he gave everything careful thought when the stakes were high enough. Then he went to find Maggie. He found her in the linen room on the 2nd floor pressing tablecloths with the methodical attention she gave to every task regardless of whether anyone was watching. He stood in the doorway until she noticed him and set the iron down. "Sir, close the door, please," he said. She closed it. The small room felt very still. It smelled of warm cotton and the faint lavender of the linen water she used. He set the folder on the shelf beside her ironing board. He did not open it. "I need you to tell me about the Langfist family," he said. "I need the honest version, not the careful version." Maggie looked at the folder. She recognized the name printed on the tab. She had known this would come eventually. People who had kept certain things to themselves for a long time developed a particular sense for the moment when the keeping was over. She had felt it this morning when she walked past Victor Ashford in the front hall, and he had looked at her in a way that was not quite a look, just a passing acknowledgement, the way you acknowledge something you have already cataloged and filed. "That was 15 years ago," she said. "I understand. Tell me what happened." She was quiet for a moment, not gathering herself exactly, more like setting something down that she had been carrying for a long time with care, because even setting it down required care. "I had a son," she said. Robert waited. "His name was Daniel. He was 9 years old." She did not look at Robert. She looked at the folder on the shelf, or perhaps at something behind it. "I was employed by the Lindqvists as a live-in housekeeper. Their daughter was 4 years old, a pleasant child, straightforward to care for. Daniel would visit me on weekends sometimes. They permitted it. They seemed to like him." She stopped, took a breath. "One Saturday afternoon, their daughter was napping. Daniel was at the top of the main staircase. He was showing me a drawing he had made at school that week, something he was proud of, and he leaned over the railing to hold it out so I could see it better. She was perfectly still. He leaned too far. He fell." A pause. "He was in hospital for 6 weeks. He had surgeries. There were complications." Another pause shorter. "He did not come home." The linen room was completely silent. Somewhere in the house, a clock ticked. "The Lindqvists filed the civil complaint 2 days after Daniel died," Maggie said. Her voice remained steady, which was the most difficult kind of steadiness, the kind that has had years to practice. "I believe they were concerned about liability. The incident had occurred in their home. The complaint placed responsibility on me for inadequate supervision." She finally looked at Robert. 3 months later, their attorney called. They would withdraw the complaint in full if I signed a non-disclosure agreement and agreed not to seek employment within their social and professional circle. She looked back at the folder. "I signed it. I had nothing left to protect at that point. I just needed it to be over." Robert was silent for a long time. "Why did you not tell me this when I hired you?" he said finally. "Because there is no way to say it that does not sound like guilt," she said. "And because I needed the work. And because I needed to be in a house where there was a child." She said the last part quietly without apology. "Not to replace him. You cannot replace a child. But because the alternative was a silence, I did not know how to live inside." Robert looked at the folder on the shelf, at her name printed on the tab. Margaret Ellen Holt. He thought about a 9-year-old boy leaning over a railing to show his mother a drawing he was proud of. "Who gave my brother this information?" he asked. Maggie shook her head slowly. "I cannot say with certainty. I have some idea, but I cannot say." "You have some idea," Robert repeated. "Yes, sir." He picked up the folder. He left the room without saying anything further, which was not a dismissal so much as a man needing to think without an audience. He went back to his study. He sat for 20 minutes without opening his laptop, without picking up his phone. The folder sat on the corner of his desk. He did not open it again. He already knew what was in it. He thought about his daughter who had stood in the East sitting room the previous day and stated her case without flinching. He thought about Eleanor's journal. He thought about a boy named Daniel who had been showing his mother a drawing. He picked up his phone. What he did not know at that moment, what he would not learn until later that day, was that while he was sitting in his study thinking about what he needed to do, Lily was in her bedroom at the small writing desk by the window, using her best handwriting on a piece of white paper. She had found the letter 4 days ago, not the Lindqvist folder. She had not seen that, but earlier in the week, passing Maggie's small room on an errand, she had seen Maggie writing at her own table. She had seen her fold the paper, seal it into an envelope, and place it in the top drawer of her dresser. And she had seen something in Maggie's face in the moment after the drawer closed, a particular expression that Lily recognized because she had seen it before. She had seen it on the faces of people at the group home where she had lived before Robert adopted her. Staff members who had decided they had used up their welcome, who were preparing quietly and without drama to leave. She had gone back to Maggie's room. Later, when Maggie was in the kitchen, she had opened the drawer and read the letter. She was 7 years old and she knew it was not allowed. She read it anyway. Dear Mr. Caldwell, I am writing to inform you that I will be resigning from my position at the end of this month. I am doing so in order to prevent further disruption to your household and to Lily's care during what should be a simple and positive transition. She deserves stability and peace, and I find that I am no longer able to provide those things without causing difficulty for you and for this family. It has been an honor to work in your home. Please tell Lily that I love her very much and that she should be brave and that being brave is not the same as not being afraid. Lily had read it 3 times, standing very still in the small room. Then she had taken the letter from the envelope and hidden it inside her pillowcase where she slept on it for 3 nights before deciding what to do. Now she was writing her own letter. She wrote slowly the way Maggie had taught her. Take your time with the things that matter. She wrote about a woman who had lost her son. She wrote about a woman who slept in a chair all night so that a child would not wake up in the dark alone. She wrote about a letter she had found in a drawer, a letter from someone who was planning to disappear quietly because she believed that was what love required, and how Lily did not think that was right. She wrote, I think love is not supposed to disappear to make other people comfortable. I think love is supposed to stay. She addressed the envelope to the Greenwich Courier. She had found the address in her father's study 2 weeks ago when she was looking for a stamp for a thank you card and had memorized it, keeping it on a folded piece of paper in the pocket of her school cardigan. She went downstairs and found Thomas, the afternoon driver, in the kitchen, having coffee before his first pickup. Thomas, she said, would you mail this for me on your way? It is a letter for school. Thomas looked at the envelope. He was a practical man who liked children and did not overthink things. Sure thing, Miss Lily, he said and tucked it into his jacket pocket. She went back upstairs. She did not tell anyone. 2 days later, Robert's phone rang at 7:45 in the morning. Victor again, but this time the practiced smoothness in his voice had been replaced by something tighter and more urgent beneath the surface control. There is a piece in the Courier, Victor said. I suggest you look at it before your day begins. Robert was already at his desk. He pulled up the paper's website before Victor finished the sentence. The article was on the front page of the local section. It was not an expose. It was not an editorial. It was a letter printed exactly as it had been submitted, with a small, italicized note from the editor at the top. The following letter was submitted by a 7-year-old resident of Greenwich. We have independently verified the central facts described. We are publishing it because we believe it deserves to be read. Robert read every word. He read it a second time more slowly. He set the phone face down on his desk. He sat very still for a long time, and for the first time in 2 years since the night Eleanor died, and someone had called him in his hotel room in Chicago and told him to come home now as quickly as he could, he felt something move in his chest that was not grief. It was not quite relief. It was not quite pride, though it was adjacent to both of those things. It was something that felt like being seen accurately and without flattery by someone who loved you, and understanding that you had not yet done anything to deserve that clarity, but were being given the chance to. His daughter had done what he had not been able to do. She had simply told the truth. The phone call started before noon, not from major journalists. The Courier was a local paper, the kind that covered town meetings and fall festivals, and the occasional feature on a family who had restored a historic barn. But it had a digital edition, and letters could be shared, and by the time Robert drove Lily home from school that afternoon, the letter had traveled far enough that a producer at a regional news station had called his assistant asking for a comment. He did not give one. He parked the car at the end of the driveway and sat with the engine off for a moment, looking at the house through the windshield. The winter light was flat and white. The house looked exactly as it always looked, large and correct and well-maintained, the kind of house that announced its owner's success to anyone who drove past. Beside him, Lily unbuckled her seatbelt. You sent the letter, he said. It was not a question. Lily looked at her hands in her lap. Yes, she said. You read Maggie's resignation letter? Yes. He should have been angry. He could feel the shape of the conversation he was supposed to be having, the one about privacy, about respecting decisions that belong to adults, about the limits of a child's appropriate involvement in household matters. He had had versions of that conversation before on other subjects in other years. He could not find the beginning of it this time. She was going to leave, Lily said. Her voice was very small and very steady, at the same time in the way of someone who has rehearsed for a difficult conversation and is now getting through it. She was going to leave so that you would not have to fight for her, so you would not have to choose between her and Uncle Victor. She thought that was what love looked like, making herself smaller, so everyone else would be more comfortable. She looked at him then. But I do not think that is right. I think love is supposed to stay. Robert looked at the house through the windshield for another long moment. Then he said, "Come inside." He found Victor in the east sitting room, which was not surprising. Victor had a talent for installing himself in spaces in a way that made it seem like he had always been there and had perhaps been invited. He had brought someone with him, a younger man in a dark suit who was introduced as a colleague from the firm and who stood slightly behind Victor with a leather portfolio in his hands. "This situation has moved past your control," Victor said without preliminary. "The letter is receiving attention, sentimental attention, which is a particular kind of attention that can be useful to us or damaging to us, depending on how you respond in the next 48 hours. He set his briefcase on the coffee table. "I am here to help you manage this correctly. Choose one of the 5 qualified candidates. Issue a brief, warm statement about Miss Holt's years of service and her departure. Close this out cleanly before it becomes a story about the Caldwell family rather than a story about a child's letter." "And if I do not," Robert said. Victor looked at him with the expression of a man who was accustomed to people eventually arriving at the correct conclusion and who had learned patience in the interim. "Then I have an obligation to the family trust to formally question whether your judgment in matters involving Lily's welfare is currently sound. That is not a threat. It is my role as trustee." "You are a trustee of a financial instrument," Robert said. "You are not a trustee of my household." "The instrument has language about guardian fitness," Victor said. "Amasen, I have mentioned this." "You have," Robert agreed. He went to his desk. He picked up his phone. He pulled up an audio file and set the phone on the coffee table between them. "3 weeks ago," he said, "you had a conversation with a private investigator named Greer in the parking structure on Elm Street. You discussed the investigation you had commissioned into Maggie Holt's background. You discussed how to present what you found to me, and you discussed the steps you intended to take if I declined to act on that information." Victor's face went very still. "You said," Robert continued, his voice level and precise, "if he keeps the housekeeper, the guardianship review becomes available to us. Father's trustees will support a review based on demonstrated judgment failures. And once guardianship is reviewed and potentially restructured, the asset questions that have been unresolved since Father's estate closed become considerably easier to address." He pressed play. The recording was clear. Parking structures were acoustically straightforward spaces, and the conversation had been long, 37 minutes as it turned out. Maggie had not intended to record anything. She had gone to collect a package Robert had ordered from a shop on Elm Street, and her phone in the outer pocket of her coat had pocket-dialed Robert's number when she walked past 2 men talking near the parking structure elevator. She had realized it much later when she noticed a missed call from Robert's number that had lasted 37 minutes. She had listened to the first several minutes of the recording before she understood what she was hearing, and then she had listened to all of it standing very still in her room with the door closed. And then she had gone to Robert's study and placed the phone on his desk and said, "Sir, I think you should listen to this," and walked out again. The voice on the recording was Victor's. There was no question about that. The younger colleague put on his coat quietly and picked up his portfolio. Victor looked at Robert for a long time. The smoothness was gone from his face now, and what was underneath it was not rage, not panic, but something that Robert recognized as the expression of a man who has been playing a long game and has just watched the board get cleared. "Father's will," Victor began. "Father's will gives you standing to raise a fitness concern in cases of documented harm or genuine incapacity," Robert said. "It does not authorize you to engineer circumstances designed to create the appearance of unfitness. It does not authorize you to commission investigations into my staff for the purpose of building a legal case. And it certainly does not give you the right to use the story of a woman's dead child as an instrument in a dispute about asset distribution." He said it without raising his voice. He had never needed to raise his voice. That particular quality had always been the one thing he and Victor had genuinely shared. He understood now that they had used it for different purposes. I want you to leave this house today, Robert said. I will have the estate attorney contact you this week about the formal transfer of your trustee consultative role. If you contest that transfer or attempt to pursue any legal action related to Lily's guardianship, I will make this recording available to the relevant parties. Victor stood. He straightened his cuffs. He looked in that moment like a man who had spent 62 years being very careful and had arrived, despite all that care, at a place where carefulness had nothing left to purchase. You are making an error, he said. I have made several, Robert replied. I intend to make fewer of them going forward. Victor left without another word. The sound of the front door closing echoed through the entrance hall. Then the house was quiet. Robert stood in the sitting room alone for a moment. Then he walked to the kitchen. Maggie was standing at the counter near the window, her hands resting on the edge of the sink, looking out at the winter garden. She had heard enough of the conversation. The walls of the east sitting room were old, and the acoustics were imprecise to understand the general shape of what had just happened. She turned when Robert came in. He is gone, Robert said. Maggie nodded, a small, careful nod. I owe you an apology, he said. She started to say something, the reflexive deflection of someone who has spent decades making themselves easy for other people to be around. He continued before she could. When he brought me that folder, I had doubts. Not about your character, but about whether I had the full picture. I should have come to you first. I should have asked you before I allowed the information to sit in my mind and create uncertainty. He paused. I did not do that. I am sorry. You came to me second, she said quietly. In my experience, that is not nothing. It is not enough. She looked down at her hands. You were trying to protect Lily. I was trying to protect my certainty, he said. I have been confusing those two things for a long time. Certainty feels like protection. It is not always the same thing. Maggie was quiet for a moment. The kitchen was warm. Outside, the winter light was beginning to soften toward afternoon. She hid the letter, Maggie said. I know. She was afraid I would leave before you had a chance to decide. She was right to be afraid, Robert said. You were going to leave. Maggie looked out the window again. I did not want to be the reason things became difficult for you. That has never been my intention in any of this. I know that, he said. That is precisely the problem. He picked up the resignation letter from the kitchen counter. He had found it on Lily's pillow that afternoon when he went upstairs where Lily had finally placed it, so he would be sure to see it. He held it for a moment without looking at it. You were going to do the same thing that was done to the woman who raised me, he said. My nanny. Her name was Margaret, and when my father decided she was no longer needed, she left without a scene, because that is what people in her position did. They made themselves easy to lose. They understood that their feelings about leaving were less important than the comfort of the family they were leaving. He set the letter down on the counter. I was 10 years old. I stood at the top of the staircase and watched her go. And I did not understand at 10 why her leaving had to be so clean and so quiet, why there was no room for it to be difficult. He looked at Maggie directly. I do not want my daughter to stand at the top of those stairs. Maggie's eyes filled. She did not look away. I would like to offer you the position officially, Robert said. Lily's primary caregiver, full authority over her daily schedule, her school preparation, her routines, her medical appointments, her activities. Appropriate salary, formal contract, all of it done properly and on record. Not because she asked me to, though she did ask with remarkable consistency and impressive tenacity. The corner of his mouth moved very slightly, but because it is the correct decision. You have been doing this work for years. I simply failed to recognize it as work because it did not fit neatly into the category I had assigned you. Maggie looked at him for a long time. People will say things, she said. People in houses like this, in the circles you move in, they will have opinions. They already do, Robert said. My 7-year-old daughter submitted a letter to a local newspaper, and it has been shared several hundred times by mid-afternoon. I think the moment for managing other people's opinions has passed. Something shifted in Maggie's face, not quite a smile, the place where a smile begins. I never wanted a title, she said. I know, he said. That is one of the reasons I trust you with it. She looked at the resignation letter on the counter. At the envelope beside it with its careful, slightly uneven handwriting, the handwriting of a woman who had written the letter with great care because she believed it was the last thing she would write in this house. Then she looked up at Robert. "Yes," she said quietly, "I will stay." Robert nodded once. That evening, the house felt different. Not lighter exactly. Some of what had been resolved that afternoon was heavy in its resolution. The weight of things that had been said that could not be unsaid, decisions made that would have consequences that could not be fully anticipated. But it felt more honest, more like itself. The way a room feels when you have finally opened the windows after a long winter and the air that comes in is cold, but it is real. Lily ate dinner with both of them at the table that evening, all three of them deliberately together, which was something new. Maggie sat at the end of the table, still slightly conscious of the chair she was sitting in, still holding herself with the careful posture of someone who was learning to occupy a space without apology, but had not yet fully learned it. Lily watched her across the table. "You are staying," Lily said. "Yes, baby." "Forever." Maggie smiled, and this time it was full and unguarded. "Let us begin with tomorrow and see how that goes." Lily seemed to find this entirely reasonable. She picked up her fork. Then she said very casually, as if she were commenting on the weather, "I knew Daddy would understand eventually. He just needed time to learn." Robert reached across the table and cut a piece of meat on Lily's plate that she had been working at unsuccessfully. A small practical thing, the kind of thing fathers do without thinking about it. "You are right," he said. "I did need time." "You are faster than I expected," Lily said generously. Maggie brought her hand up to cover her mouth. Robert almost smiled, a genuine one, quiet and unhurried. After dinner, Lily disappeared upstairs and returned with her drawing. She placed it on the table in front of Robert with both hands carefully, as if it were something official. It was the same three figures, but she had added a background this time. They were standing in what appeared to be a garden with flowers around their feet, which was optimistic given the January snow outside. And above the figures, she had drawn a house. In one of the house's windows, she had drawn a small yellow square. "I added the light," she said. Robert looked at it. "What does the light mean?" "It means someone is home," Lilstein said, "so no one has to be scared when they walk up the path." He kept the drawing. That night, after he had said goodnight to Lily and she was settled, he went to his study and took Eleanor's journal from the bottom drawer. He sat with it in his lap for a moment without opening it. Then he placed it on the shelf above his desk where it would be visible rather than hidden, where it belonged. He took the drawing Lily had given him and propped it against the base of the lamp on the corner of his desk. He looked at the small yellow square in the window of the small drawn house. Someone is home. He sat there for a while in the quiet, and the house around him felt for the first time in a long time like it was exhaling. Spring arrived in March that year with the cautious and then sudden quality that Connecticut springs always had, and as if the season had been waiting just beyond the tree line, and then decided all at once that waiting was finished. The snow retreated from the driveway first, then from the garden, then from the wide lawn behind the house, and one morning the air came through the kitchen window with something different in it, something that was almost warm, and Lily announced at breakfast that the yellow flowers she had planted with Maggie in the fall were beginning to show. She was right. By mid-March, small green shoots had pushed up through the dark soil along the back garden border. By the end of the month, the roses along the fence had buds. By April, the lawn was green again, and the windows of the house were open more often, and the rooms that had been sealed and quiet all winter filled with sounds that large houses were not always good at carrying birdsong and wind and the voice of a child who had decided that spring was a good reason to be outside whenever possible. The new arrangement had settled into itself by then, not without adjustment. Adjustments took time, and some of the staff had needed more of it than others, a few quiet weeks of recalibration, of learning how to understand the new shape of things. But children accept new truths faster than adults do, especially when the new truth feels like safety. And Lily had accepted this particular truth on the first morning, when she came downstairs and found Maggie already at the breakfast table with her small spiral notebook going over the week's schedule, and understood, without being told, that this was how it was going to be now. Every morning, Maggie sat at the table with the notebook. She reviewed Lily's school commitments, her reading assignments, her activities. She packed lunch with the precision of someone who had learned over years exactly which things Lily would eat and which things would come home untouched. She walked Lily to the car, checked that the coat was properly buttoned, and the scarf properly wrapped. And before Lily climbed in, she said the same thing she had begun saying from the first morning of the new arrangement. Be kind today. Pay attention. And remember that I am here when you get back. Lily repeated it back every time solemnly like a small oath. You are here when I get back. Robert noticed that Lily had stopped asking who would pick her up from school. She had stopped asking who would help with homework or who would be in the kitchen when she came in from outside or who would sit with her in the library in the evenings. She already knew the answer. She had always known the answer. She had simply spent a winter convincing everyone else to know it too. On a Saturday morning in mid-April, Lily and Maggie were in the garden with trowels and a bag of potting soil, planting a row of flowers along the stone border near the back terrace. Lily had chosen the flowers herself at the garden center the previous weekend, holding each small plastic pot up to the light and examining it with the seriousness of someone making an important decision. She wore gardening gloves that were too large for her hands, left over from a pair Eleanor had kept in the mudroom, and she kept having to shake them straight when the fingers flopped over. She had gotten dirt on her knees already and on the cuff of her sleeve, and she was deeply unconcerned about both. You have to press the soil down gently, Maggie was saying, kneeling beside her and guiding her hands. Not too hard. If you compact it too much, the roots cannot push through properly. Everything living needs room to expand, room to breathe. Lily pressed the soil very carefully with both hands with great deliberateness. Like this. Exactly like that, Maggie said. Now pat it just once more lightly, just to settle it. Good. That is exactly right. Robert watched them from the back terrace, a cup of coffee in his hand, his phone in his jacket pocket with 3 unread messages and 2 calls he had not returned. He had been standing here for 20 minutes. He was aware that he should go inside and attend to those messages. He did not go inside. He watched his daughter laugh when the oversized glove flopped over her fingers again, and she had to use her chin to push it back. He watched Maggie pretend to be very serious about the spacing of the next plant, measuring the distance from the last one with the edge of the trowel, while Lily watched with solemn attention and then reached over and adjusted it very slightly and looked up to see if Maggie would agree. Maggie examined it and nodded gravely. Yes, she said, that is better. Lily nodded with satisfaction and reached for the next pot. He thought about a version of himself from 8 months ago, standing in this same spot, looking at this same garden, thinking that providing it, this space, this house, this carefully maintained property, was the same as providing what Lily needed. He had been wrong about that. He had been wrong about it in a way that was embarrassing in its completeness, the kind of wrongness that is hard to see from inside because it has been constructed to look like rightness. He had built everything correctly. He had built almost nothing that mattered. He walked down from the terrace and into the garden and crouched beside Lily at the flower border. The yellow ones are coming in fastest, Lily said, pointing to the row they had planted 2 weeks ago, the ones that were already showing a faint yellow tip at the center of each bud. I see that, Robert said. Miss Maggie says that some flowers are just more ready than others, Lily said. They have been waiting all winter for the chance. That sounds right, Robert said. Lily looked at him with the directness she had always had, the quality he had sometimes found difficult, and now found he was grateful for. Are you happy? She asked. He looked at Maggie, who was a few feet away, pressing soil around the base of a small rose bush she had rescued from the back of the garden center's clearance shelf, talking to it in the low, unhurried way she talked to things she was trying to encourage. Yes, Robert said, I am. Lily nodded, satisfied, and went back to her flower. She patted the soil around it one more time with both hands. Then, without looking up, she said, I knew you would be. You just needed time to learn what home means. He stayed in the garden with them until noon. No calls returned, no messages read, just the April light on the new grass and the smell of soil and rosemary from the herb border, and the sound of a child explaining to a flower very seriously that it was doing very well and should keep trying. Later that afternoon, Robert had a business lunch at his club in town with 2 colleagues and their wives, the kind of regular social obligation that his calendar had carried for years, a combination of genuine professional relationship and the performance of professional relationship that was part of operating in his particular world. At some point during the meal, one of the men said, I heard you ended up settling the Nannies situation. Some local press about it. We did settle it, Robert said. Good agency in the end, the man asked. No agency, Robert said. The person who was already caring for Lily is now officially in that role. There was a small pause, the kind of pause that occurs when something has been said that does not fit the expected shape of the conversation. You promoted someone from within the household, one of the wives asked with the careful tone of someone reserving judgment while gathering information. That is one way to put it, Robert said. Another way is that I finally recognized what was actually happening in my own house. The pause this time was slightly longer. Well, the other man said in the diplomatic tone of someone moving past an awkwardness, loyalty counts for a great deal in household staff. That is true. It does, Robert agreed. He did not elaborate. He understood that if he said the true thing, which was that the person who had been caring for his daughter through fevers and nighttime fears, in the quiet, ordinary sadness of being a child in a large house that had lost its warmth, that this person had been hiding in plain sight for years, while he was busy looking for someone with the right credentials, the conversation would become uncomfortable for people who preferred to think of childcare as a service that could be optimized through proper sourcing. He did not want to have that conversation over club sandwiches. He simply picked up his water glass and let the topic move on. That evening, after Lily was home from a play date at a friend's house and had eaten dinner and done her reading and been through her bath, Robert came downstairs to find Maggie in the library, sitting in the armchair near the east window, with a book open in her lap and a small lamp lit beside her. She looked up when he came in. "She is down," Maggie said. "She asked me to tell you she has a spelling test on Thursday and would like to practice tomorrow evening." "I will be home for dinner tomorrow," Robert said. "I will let her know." He did not leave the doorway immediately. He stood for a moment looking at the room at the shelf of children's books that Lily had arranged by color one Saturday afternoon, at the low table near the window that held Lily's current drawing project, at the armchair where Maggie sat with her book, looking entirely as if she had always been in that chair in that room in that house. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Of course." He came into the room and sat in the other chair across the low table from her. "When you wrote that letter, the resignation letter, what were you thinking?" Maggie closed her book, keeping her finger in the page. She considered the question honestly, which was something she always did. "I was thinking that I had caused enough disruption," she said, "that my staying was costing you something in terms of your brother, in terms of the public attention, in terms of the difficulty of the decision. And I thought that if I left quietly without drama, the problem would resolve itself and Lily would adjust and everyone would be better off. And now," he said, she was quiet for a moment. "Now I think I was wrong," she said, "or not wrong exactly, but incomplete. I was thinking about what my leaving would cost everyone else. I was not thinking about what it would bond Lily." She paused. "I have done that before. Made myself easy to lose so that other people would not have to experience difficulty on my account. I am trying to stop doing it." Robert looked at the low table between them at a piece of Lily's drawing paper that had been left there with a half-finished sketch of what appeared to be a horse or possibly a very ambitious dog. "My brother has spent years in a position of significant influence over this family's affairs," he said. "The extent of that influence, in some of the ways he has exercised it, I am still understanding fully. The estate attorneys are involved now. It will take time to work through." "I know," Maggie said. "I am sorry it came to that." "Do not be," he said. "It needed to come to that. I should have looked more carefully years ago." He reached into the jacket he had draped over the arm of the chair and took out a framed picture. He handed it to Maggie across the table. She looked at it. It was Lily's drawing. The three figures in the garden, the house behind them, the light in the window. He had framed it in a thin dark wood frame, simple and clean. "I thought you should have a copy," he said. "She drew it for the table, but I think it belongs to both of us." Maggie looked at the drawing for a long time, at the small yellow square in the window of the small house, at the three figures with their hands connected. "She sees very clearly," Maggie said. "She always has," Robert said. "I was not always paying attention." He stood to go, then he stopped. "In my world," he said, "contracts matter. Titles matter, not because they are the most important thing, but because they are the way the world recognizes what already exists. When I made your position official, when I gave you the contract and the authority and the salary, I was not creating something new. I was naming something that had been real for years." He looked at the framed drawing in her hands. I was trying to make sure no one could decide one day that it was unnecessary. The way my father decided that Margaret was unnecessary. The way things that are real but unnamed get treated as optional. Maggie looked up at him. You are giving Lily what I did not have, he said. The right to keep the person she loves. Maggie's eyes filled. She did not look away this time. I told you once, she said quietly, no child should wake up sick and alone in the dark. And I told you, he said, that no child should grow up in a house full of everything except the person who loves her. He paused. I meant that. He said goodnight and went upstairs. Maggie sat in the armchair for a while longer, with the framed drawing in her hands, the lamp burning beside her in the quiet library, and outside the window, the April night settling over the garden, where the yellow flowers were opening one at a time slowly, in their own order, in their own time, because some things could not be rushed, only waited for. By May, the routine had the comfortable weight of something that had always existed. Lily moved through her days with the particular ease of a child who knows exactly where the edges of her world are and trusts that they will hold. She knew who would be at the breakfast table in the morning. She knew who would be waiting when the car came home from school. She knew whose voice she would hear in the evening, reminding her that 20 minutes of reading was not negotiable and that brushing teeth properly meant more than 3 seconds of effort. She had stopped treating these certainties as gifts, which was how children treated things they were afraid of losing. She had started treating them as facts, which was how children treated things they trusted completely. That shift was small and enormous at the same time. Robert noticed it on a Tuesday morning in May, when he came downstairs to find Lily at the kitchen table doing a word puzzle from a book Maggie had brought home from the library, and Maggie at the stove, making oatmeal, and the two of them talking about whether caterpillars knew while they were inside the chrysalis that they were going to become butterflies, or whether the whole thing was a surprise. I think they know, Lily was saying. I think they feel it happening. I think you might be right, Maggie said, though I have never been a caterpillar, so I cannot say for certain. Have you ever wished you were? Lily asked. Maggie thought about this seriously. There are aspects of the chrysalis stage that have some appeal, she said. The part where you are becoming something and no one can bother you while it is happening. Lily considered this. That does sound good, she agreed. Robert poured his coffee and sat at the table and did not announce himself beyond that, and neither of them paused their conversation for more than a moment, which was exactly right. He was simply present in the room, part of it, not a visitor to a scene that was happening without him. He had been learning slowly and with some difficulty how to be present in rooms rather than arriving in them. In June, two things happened that mattered in different ways. The first was that Robert received a formal letter from the estate attorneys indicating that Victor Ashford had formally resigned his trustee consultative position following a review of certain conduct. The letter was careful in its language, and that the relevant oversight responsibilities had been redistributed among the remaining trustees. The matter had been resolved without litigation, which was how Robert had wanted it, and which Victor had ultimately accepted, perhaps because the alternative had been made sufficiently clear to him. Robert read the letter twice, placed it in the appropriate file, and went downstairs to have breakfast with his daughter. The second thing that happened in June was that Lily lost her first tooth. It happened at dinner a Tuesday, the kind of unremarkable evening that turns out to be memorable only because of what occurs in it. She bit into a piece of bread and made a sound of surprise and brought her hand to her mouth, and when she took it away, there was a small white tooth in her palm, looking very small and very significant. It came out, she said with the expression of someone who has been told something will happen, has understood intellectually that it will happen, and is still somewhat startled by the fact that it has actually happened. So it did, Robert said. Maggie was already up from the table, coming around with a small paper napkin and a look of pleased calm, the look of someone for whom this event was joyful but not alarming. Let me see. Good, it came out cleanly. Does it hurt? A little, Lily said. No, not really. She looked at the tooth in the napkin. It is smaller than I thought it would be. They always are, Maggie said. They seem much larger when they are in your mouth. Lily looked at Robert. Does the tooth fairy actually come? She asked with the particular tone of a child who has heard the story but is now requesting the adult version. Robert looked at Maggie. Maggie looked at Robert. What do you think? Robert said to Lily. Lily looked at the tooth. She thought about it with the seriousness she brought to most questions. I think, she said carefully, that the tooth fairy is probably a way that parents make losing a tooth feel like something good is happening instead of something just falling out. That is a very sophisticated interpretation, Robert said. But Lily added, I also think that it would be nice if something appeared under my pillow tonight, even if it is not actually from a fairy. I think that can be arranged, Robert said. Maggie wrapped the tooth in the napkin and helped Lily hold it carefully for the rest of dinner. Later that night, after Lily was asleep, Robert found a crisp $5 bill in his wallet and brought it to Maggie in the hallway outside Lily's room. I do not know the going rate, he said. I believe it varies considerably, Maggie said, taking the bill. I will see to it. He stood in the hallway for a moment. She asked me this morning, he said, whether I remembered when she used to have nightmares. I said I remembered hearing about them. She said that was not the same as remembering. Maggie looked at him. She was right, he said. It is not the same. He looked at the closed door of Lily's room. I was not there for most of the nightmares. I was there for the structure around them. The house, the security, the right neighborhood, and the right school. I thought that was the same as being present. He was quiet for a moment. It is not the same. No, Maggie said gently, it is not. I am trying to be better at being present, he said. I know, Maggie said. She knows. Children know these things. Does she say anything about it to you? Maggie considered. She says you are learning, she said. She says it the way she would say the flowers are growing, like it is a process she is watching with interest and confidence. Robert nodded slowly. She has a great deal of faith in you, Maggie said. She has more than I have earned, he said. Perhaps, Maggie said, but children tend to give it before it is earned. It is the way they teach. He went to bed. In the morning, Lily came downstairs with the $5 bill in her hand and the gap in her smile and the absolute certainty of a child who has decided that the tooth fairy is a reasonable metaphor for parental love and is entirely satisfied with the arrangement. By July, the garden behind the house was at its fullest. The roses along the back fence were in bloom, deep red ones and a pale cream variety that had been Eleanor's favorite, and that Maggie had tended carefully through 3 winters to keep it alive. The yellow flowers Lily had planted in April had gone from small and tentative to robust and abundant, leaning slightly toward the morning sun in the way of things that know what they need and arrange themselves accordingly. On a Saturday morning in late July, Lily sat at the kitchen table with her drawing materials spread around her. She was working on something large, a full sheet of heavy paper that she had requisitioned from Robert's printer by the method of asking Maggie if she could have it, which Maggie had said was up to her father, and then asking Robert directly, which had worked immediately. Robert sat at the other end of the table with the newspaper, though he had been on the same page for some time. Daddy, Lily said, not looking up from her drawing. Yes. Do you remember when you made me choose a nanny at the beginning in January? Robert lowered the newspaper. I remember, he said. You thought I was going to choose one of the 5 women, Lily said. I did. But I chose Maggie. She said it with the satisfaction of someone recording a historical fact that she intends to make sure is correctly understood. Yes, Robert said. You did. Lily looked up at him. That was the most important choice I ever made. He felt something in his chest tighten very gently. I think it might have been, he said. Maggie at the stove turned slightly, but did not interrupt. Lily looked back at her drawing. Also, she said, I think it was the most important choice you ever made, when you said yes. Robert was quiet for a moment, then he said, I think you may be right about that too. Lily nodded, apparently having confirmed what she already knew, and returned to her drawing. After a while, she brought it over and placed it in front of Robert. It was the most detailed version yet of the picture she had been drawing since January. 3 figures standing in a garden. The tall one in a dark jacket, the small one with 2 braids, the woman in the middle with her hands extended to both sides, holding both other hands. Around them, the garden was elaborate flowers of various kinds in careful rows, a stone border, a bird in the upper left corner that might have been a cardinal. And behind and above them, the house with its many windows, and in one of those windows, the small yellow square of light. But she had added something new this time. Above the house in the pale blue sky, she had colored with careful, even strokes. She had written something in her best handwriting. Home, just that word, centered above everything. Written the way children write words they believe are important enough to need no explanation. Robert looked at the drawing for a long time. When I was a boy, he said slowly, I thought a home was defined by its size and its quality, by whether it was the right address and had the right things in it. I thought that was the way you knew whether you had succeeded. Lily listened. She sat in the chair beside him and listened the way she listened to things she considered worth paying attention to. I was wrong about that, Robert said. A home is defined by whether the people inside it feel safe when they go to sleep and safe when they wake up. Whether they know who will be there. Whether they can say the name of the person who is there and trust that the name is right. He looked at the words she had written above the drawing. I did not know how to make this house into that kind of home for a long time. And then someone showed me. I showed you, Lily said. You did, he agreed. You showed me by choosing correctly when I was choosing incorrectly. You showed me by refusing to change your answer even when I kept asking the question. He paused. And Maggie showed me. By doing the work every day whether or not it was in the job description. By staying when it would have been easier to go. Maggie brought the pancakes to the table and set them down and sat in her place at the end of the table. And for a moment, all three of them were simply there in the warm kitchen in July, with the windows open and the garden visible beyond them, and the pancakes steaming, and the drawing on the table between them, with its single word above the roofline. Home. My mother used to say, Maggie said, pouring syrup, that children do not remember the size of the house they grew up in. They remember who was in the kitchen in the morning. I will remember, Lily said immediately. I know, Maggie said. I will remember the pancakes, Lily added for completeness. Robert laughed, a real laugh, the kind that comes from somewhere deep and uncalculated. It surprised him a little. It had been surprising him more often lately. After breakfast, they went outside. The day was warm and cloudless, the kind of summer morning that feels while you are in it like it is specifically designed to be remembered later. Lily ran ahead down the path to the garden, and Maggie walked behind her at the pace of someone who is in no hurry because they are exactly where they intend to be. Robert walked beside Maggie. They did not talk about anything important. They talked about whether the rose near the east corner needed to be tied back before it got much taller, and about a book Lily had asked to start at bedtime, and about whether the bird that had been appearing in the maple tree near the fence was the same bird or multiple birds that looked similar. It was the most ordinary conversation Robert could remember having in years. In the garden, Lily knelt beside the yellow flowers and examined each one with the attentive satisfaction of a person reviewing the results of a project they have invested in. Daddy, she called, come look. This one is the biggest. He crossed the garden and knelt beside her in the grass, not worrying about his trousers, and looked at the flower she was pointing to. It was objectively the largest of the row. It had been the first bud to open, and it had simply kept going, generous and unself-conscious, in the way of living things that have found exactly the right conditions. It is the biggest, he agreed, because it was planted first, Lily said. It had the most time. That makes sense, Robert said. Lily looked at him with her mother's eyes. Eleanor's directness, the quality that saw things clearly and did not see the point of pretending otherwise. You had the most time too, she said, to learn, and you are doing very well. He put his arm around her shoulders and felt her lean into him, easy and unhurried, the way children lean into people they trust completely. He looked over the top of her head at Maggie, who was standing a few steps away with the sun behind her, watching them both with an expression that was simple and uncomplicated and full. He thought about a house with 43 rooms. He thought about what the rooms had been and what they had become and what they would be. He thought about a boy standing at the top of a staircase watching a suitcase disappear through a front door, not understanding why love was so easy to put in a car and drive away. He understood now. He understood that some things once named and recognized and held in the light did not have to be easy to lose. That sometimes if you paid attention, if you were brave enough and clear-eyed enough, you could arrange things so that the people who mattered most were not at the mercy of someone else's decision to let them go. He understood that his daughter had taught him this. He understood that Maggie had made it possible. He understood that Eleanor, who had watched from a doorway years ago and written about it by lamplight and hoped he would be brave enough when the time came, had somehow made sure he would have another chance to be. That evening after dinner, after Lily was asleep, Robert sat in his study at his desk. On the shelf above the desk, Eleanor's journal stood upright between two books. Beside the lamp, Lily's drawing sat in its dark wood frame. The three figures. The garden, the house, the light in the window, the single word above it all. There was a soft knock at the door. "Come in," he said. Maggie looked in. "I wanted to let you know that Lily asked me when I put her to bed tonight whether she could get a dog." Robert looked at her. "What did you tell her?" "I told her that was a conversation for her father," Maggie said. Very diplomatic. "I have had practice." He almost smiled. "What do you think?" he said. Maggie considered. "I think she is responsible enough. I think a dog would give her something to take care of, which she has an instinct for. And I think the garden is certainly large enough." "That sounds like a yes," Robert said. "It sounds like an opinion," Maggie said. "The decision is yours." He looked at the drawing on his desk, at the light in the window. "Tell her we will go and look," he said. "Why commit to anything? Just look." Maggie nodded. "Maggie," he said before she could go. She waited. "When I was interviewing those 5 candidates in January," he said, "I had a very clear idea of what I was looking for. Credentials, training, references, a professional record that could be verified and quantified." He paused. "I did not know how to look for what Lily needed because what Lily needed did not appear on any form." "It rarely does," Maggie said. "No," he agreed, "it does not." He looked at the journal on the shelf. "Eleanor knew, I think. She wrote about it. She hoped I would see it." Maggie said nothing. "I'm glad I finally did," he said, "even if it took longer than it should have." "It took exactly as long as it took," Maggie said. "That is usually how it works." He nodded. She said goodnight and closed the door softly. He sat for a while longer in the quiet study, the house settled and still around him, the garden dark beyond the window, the drawing lit by the lamp's warm circle. He thought about Eleanor and about Daniel and about a little girl who had stood in a room full of strangers and reached past all of them for the one person who had never been a stranger at all. He thought about what it meant to build something that lasted, not a company, not a reputation, not a house, something that lasted the way love lasted when it was given room to breathe and time to grow, and the simple foundational understanding that it was not temporary. He looked at the word Lily had written above the roofline of the small drawn house. Home. Just that. Just the one word that contained everything. He turned off the lamp. He went upstairs to bed in his own house, which was finally completely in every room of its 43, the thing it had always been meant to be.